Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar on advanced financial reporting techniques in Sage Intacct. I'm Sarah Novak, Marketing Manager at LBMC Technology Solutions. And just a few real quick housekeeping items before we get started. All the phone lines have been muted. If you have any kind of difficulty, please let me know using the chat panel. We will be taking questions throughout today's webinar, so please feel free to submit them at any time, and we will make sure and get to them at the end. And also, this webinar is eligible for CPE credits. In order to qualify for 2 CPE credits, you must stay on the entire session and make sure and answer any polling questions when prompted. We'll be recording this session and sending that out in a few days' time. So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to Glenn Sharp. Glenn has 14 years of experience in accounting and has been with LBMC Technology Solutions for over 14 years. And he serves as our Sage Intacct Sales Support Manager. So thanks again for joining us today. And Glenn, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And thanks everyone for joining today. As she mentioned, we're talking today, our hot topics is on advanced reporting and insights. We'll be covering some of the new features that came out in the latest release towards the end of our session today, but we're going to be talking about this topic for advanced reporting and insights for the majority of our time together. For this course, some prerequisites I would recommend, it's not required, but recommend for this. Most of you all on the call have been using Intacct, so you've probably been creating some financial reports already. So as you may have done some filtering, comparing data, understanding dimensions and dimension groups is going to be a big part of what we talk about today, and maybe performing calculations. If you've not had a chance to attend just kind of the regular Intacct Financial Reporting and Dashboards course, I'll have some information at the end where you can get more information on that. Or you can reach out for more information. So our agenda for today, we will be going over is using custom fields and dimension groups, and also on reports, creating dimension-based financial reports, using dimension structures and account-based financial reports, creating complex account groups, using reporting accounts, we'll be talking about those, and also using books, using custom and user-defined books within and how you can report off of those as well. But to start out, we'll be talking about using custom fields and dimension groups. So we have some topics and objectives here. So what are custom fields, creating custom fields, and using custom fields. And our objectives, of course, will line up with those on exactly how to create a custom field, explain how they can be used in reporting, and then also filtering a dimension group via custom field. You can create custom fields if you want to capture or review comments on specific objects, and if you want to specify the date something was reviewed. You want to capture compliance reporting information, maybe for nonprofit types of organizations. So when creating a new custom field, one first thing that you want to kind of consider on that is that data that should be stored within a system. Remember, storing some data like credit cards or other secure items may violate some privacy standards, so you want to make sure of that. And most of the time, your custom fields are going to be created, or all the time will be created either under platform services or customization services, which we have kind of the path down here. So you generally need to be a full administrator, have those rights in order to create custom fields. I'm going to go through some of the process of kind of what you see whenever you're creating custom field before we go in and actually kind of do it in a live environment as we do that. So when creating a custom field, first thing you do is you're going to select an object to extend, and you'll find that there's many objects out there. You can extend certain dimensional aspects or dimension things like customers, which we'll be using as an example. Or your other dimensions, or just other objects like the GL account, if you want to add things to that, for example. If you've renamed your dimensions, in other words, if you're calling department something else, you're calling class something else, whenever you are extending that and choosing that object in step 1, it will be the original name. It will not be the name that you changed it to, because it's going by the system name. So if you renamed departments, maybe to say something else, business units or something in here, it will still say departments. Now, as far as going to kind of step 2 up here, whenever you're going to select what type of the data type that you're going to use is kind of the second step of that. There are two data types of the ones we can see here, whose options vary depending on the type of data you want to capture. And one of those is going to be our pick list type of value. So you can have it, if you choose pick list, you can choose the values underneath the pick list. The others, one is going to be your date type. So you can have a date captured, upon the field. You can also have it default to today's date if you want to as well. But just to kind of review the different data types that you can create for your field data type, you see them all listed here. The checkbox provides a single checkbox that reports a value of true or false, if it's checked or unchecked for that. Currency takes advantage of multi-currency applications or currency rounding, currency symbols and reports. The date field, as we mentioned, can be used to autofill with the current date. It captures the date in the system. The email field used for email addresses that follow a standard format like someone's name at domain.com type of thing. Number is sometimes used, handled differently than other strings, and that's because they can be used in computations, the number field. The percent displays a number as a percentage. The pick list, as we mentioned, limits the input to a defined set of options, whereas the pick list multi-select limits the input to one or more values in a defined set of options. A sequence, which isn't used too much, but it autofills with the next value in the series. Text is what we're using today in our example, is used for a short string of text or a number. Whereas if you have like a notes field, then you might want to use a text area. There's a multi-line field used to input long strings of text. The URL treats the ender text as a clickable link. And the last one there is password. So the password hides characters while they're being entered. That is done by the browser. It's not done by Intacct. So just keep in mind for that, the password fields are considered not secure and should be used with care. After you've selected, of course, what object you want to extend and then what data type that you want to use, then you go to choose the pick list or whatever type of field that you're using. These options here will vary based off the type of field that you're using. So of course, on the pick list field, as we see here, you specify the list of the allowable values. It's hard to say. You can also select if you want to use the first value as default or if you want to sort alphabetically for that. Whereas if you, on the same step, if you were using a date type field, which we see on the right, you can default it to today's date for that. On both of these examples here, you can see that there's a field ID. The field ID is required. It's used if you're importing data from other systems, or it's also used in some customizations, but it's required on all custom fields. The system will it will actually come up with a suggested field ID based off of the label that you're using on that field. Then the last step in the process, step 4 for that, is kind of your deployment options. So for this, you can mark if the field is going to be required for that. You can mark if the field is going to be hidden. A lot of times if the field is hidden, that's used by developers, lots of times to kind of have information come over that they want to show. And if the field is inactive, maybe that you've had a field, you've been using that field, storing data in that field, but then you no longer want to show that field, but you don't want to lose the data, you can now mark it inactive. If you delete the field, just be aware that it will delete the history of that field across all existing records. And then the next 3 options that we see right here, we have the yellow box around. This kind of determines where on an object a custom field will occur. So you see right here in our example that the field that we're creating, which is called customer relevance, I wanted it to show on my customer record, which is what here on the right, in the second tab, which is additional information, and I want it to show up in the section called customer details. In order to put the field there, my field set would say customer details. And you just type that in. It's a text value, but if you type it in exactly with the capitalization as it is here, then it will your field will show up in that area. Okay. Then if to show up on the tab, and where it says show on page, that's your list of your different tabs, and you can select which tab that you want on. If you wanted to put this field in its own tab, a whole separate tab, a new tab, then you could put it down here in the 3rd row. You would just type what you want to that new tab to say. You could also create a new field set, and then your field would show up there in its own section on a new tab. So kind of to go through these steps here, I'm going to switch over to our Intacct environment here. Since we're using platform services, and in this instance, I'm in a multi-entity environment. So if you're in a multi-entity environment, you only use platform services at the top level. I'm going to go into my platform services. Under my object customizations is where I'll see my custom fields. If I click on my custom fields right here, this is actually the only place we can go if you need to edit a custom field that you already have in there, or if you want to delete it. But there again, if you delete it, it will delete the history that you have saved in that custom field. So in our example right here, just kind of walk through the one that I created that we're looking at on the screen. This is where you select the object. So what record or form within Intacct do you want this to appear on? You can see here just about all of the different, most of the different objects within Intacct are available. There are a few that are not. But we're using the customer dimension or customer record in our example. So then the next step is where we choose, and we went over these different values of the different data types that you can use. And here we're using text for our data type. And this is where the field characteristics comes in. So that I put it in a label, the system automatically put in a field ID for me. Okay, and this, again, this does have to be unique across all of Intacct, across all of your system here. And then since I'm using a text field, I just put how long I want that field to be. So as we mentioned, if this was a date field, you would have the option of choosing if you want to want today's date. If this was a pick list type of field instead of text, you would enter your different values of what you want for your pick list values. And then you could also make other selections on there as well, as if you wanted to do it alphabetically or use the top value as a default. And so whatever type of field that you are using, this area right here changes. And then our last step, step number 4 here, is our deployment options. So here again, I'm making this field required in the system. Then down here, I wanted it to show within my customer details area on my additional information tab within my customer record. Once that you have that information in there, this is the last step. You can either click on done or on save for that, and that will put your field out there within your environment. So on ours, mine is under our accounts receivable, under our customers area. So my custom field is under my additional information, which right here is a text field, and I did mark it as being required for that. Okay. After I did that, I updated my customer records. I had them associated to a territory, which we'll see later, and also I have them associated to a customer relevance, which are values like growth, mid-tier, different types of action, different types of relevance that I'm using in reporting as well. Okay, I want to go back and talk about how these can be used in reports as well. So I'm going to go back into our presentation here. So using custom fields in custom reports. So this is a report that I created based off of the data there. The custom fields are most commonly used in custom reports. The example here shows a custom report that displays the customer relevance custom field in a column. You can see right here. The report is a filter to only show customers who's in the growth or the mid-tier areas. Then the report is also, I'm grouping this report together by my custom field. So I'm grouping by growth, showing all my growth customers, grouping by mid-tier, showing all of my mid-tier customers. If your custom field that you're using, here I'm using a text field, if I was using a number type of field, as I mentioned, if you want to use it in a calculation in a custom report, it does have to be the numeric type of field to be used for that. But this is a custom report or an ad hoc report. If a custom field is added for a financial report, and that would only happen if you added it to a dimension. So my customer, of course, is one of my dimensions in there. So this is actually adding it to a financial type of report. But this type of report is a dimension-based financial report. Okay. You can see right here, this is my different customers. Okay. And I'm using my customer dimension and dimensional type of report for that. You cannot use a custom field in an account-based report. So if you think of your regular P&Ls, or balance sheets, you cannot use the custom field in those type of reports, just in your dimension-based reports. If it is a number type of field, it can be used in a summary column calculation on a financial report, but it cannot be used in the computation like for an account group. So in other words, if it's in a type of row, you cannot use it there. So in my example here, I have what's called a dimensional structure. That's called all customer territories for that. And then we'll take a look at this report here actually live here in just a little bit. But underneath there, I have my data for my different customers, and I'm showing here my customer relevance, okay, which is a field on my customer form, and I'm also showing my customer type here as well. So even though this is a pulling in financial type of information in our financial reports area, I'm pulling in fields from my customer record onto this, since that is one from a dimension. We can also use custom fields in order to create dimension groups. Here's an example of one that I created called Key Customers. So in Key Customers, what I'm doing is I'm using my custom field, my customer relevance field. I'm pulling in just customers who are either strategic or mid-tier. Okay. So I'm using that for my group type is all members, as you can see right here. And then I'm pulling back in just customers who meet the strategic or mid-tier and are active for that. Now, I would probably also, if I'm creating this, also mark this as a dimension structure as well. Because when we mark something as dimension structure, the checkbox is selected. That creates this, this customer group as a dimension structure with the same name as the group. So what that does, it allows you additional reporting capabilities and be able to put it in, like in hierarchies and those type of things. If you don't select that dimension structure, you can only use this in more filtering reports types of areas. Now, when you create a group of information, that whenever you're just like looking at information, you can use that group. So here's just a list of view of customers. Okay, so on my list view of customers right here, you can select, if you've never noticed before, the kind of the third option over is you can use a group filter. So I can, under that filter, I can select my key customers. So it's going to show in my customer list just those ones in that group. Or I'm sure most of you have created financial reports. So when you're creating financial reports, under the filtering section, you can go under there and you can also just pull in that a certain group of customers that you want to use, or whatever dimension that you're using for that you created in a group. Those dimension groups can be used, and of course I'm using a custom field in order to create those custom groups. We're looking at those a little bit more as we look at some other areas. Sometimes people ask, what is the difference between a custom field versus a statistical account? Okay? While statistical numbers can be tracked using custom fields, there's a difference between how you use those. Okay? If you're saving things in a custom field, for example, and you expand it or you create it, the custom field is going to kind of keep that data. It does not retain the historical data for reporting purposes like a statistical account is going to do. It's just going to change that data kind of going forward. If the custom field is added to a dimension, it can be referenced in a dimensional-based financial report, but not on an account-based financial report where a statistical account can be used in those areas. And if a custom field is added to a transaction, like a bill or invoice, you can only include it on a custom report. Okay, if it's added there, you cannot include it on any type of financial reports. Whereas statistical accounts gives you a little bit more flexibility in some of those areas. So sometimes you have to decide if you're adding data, do I need to store it as a custom field, an object or dimension, or do I need to actually create a statistical account? I want to keep more history on this type of field, or this type of data. At this point, I'm going to go into our first polling questions area. So Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, everybody should see the 3 polling questions available. We've given 3 minutes for these questions. If you can please take the time to answer them. we have just a little less than a minute left. If you want to go ahead and finish up if you have not already answered. Just to let everyone know real quick, I've gotten a couple of questions. We will be sending out a copy of these slides to everyone after the webinar. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
Yep.
We'll continue on. Okay, so our next topic is creating dimension-based financial reports. Of course, we'll be looking at creating dimension structures, displaying dimensions and then rows, displaying dimension attributes, and filtering rows by account groups as we're doing this. So you can create dimension-based reports to easily analyze data and gain insights into the performance and health of your business. An example we have here, the one on the left, is kind of a consultant analysis. So this report analyzes the time and materials for consultants working on projects. The rows display the employee dimension, consultants, which of course is a dimension, your employees is a dimension. So it's showing those consultants kind of grouped by different levels. Then the columns display the account groups, okay, which are such as billable hours or project revenue. So these are your account groups over here. These are your dimensions level over here. The other one that we have here as an example is an expense analysis. So this matrix reports or analyzes the operating expenses by departments and also by locations. So the rows display the department dimension. But the columns are displaying the operating expenses, and then the operating expenses are expanded by the locations. Looking at things different ways there. Other use cases that you may use is profitability by customer, by project, or by item. You want to show expenses by vendor, by project or employee, or revenue by customer or item. Or if you're using grants, maybe grant insights, where you have your grants listed down the left-hand side and you're looking at things that way. But all of those are different dimensional based type of things. We're creating a dimensional hierarchy. Sometimes that confuses people a bit of how to kind of translate that. And so if you've created financial reports within Intacct, and you may be familiar with account groups. So you can think of account groups are usually, of course, our rows on a financial report. It's how we think of account groups, where we have our individual GL accounts, different individual GL accounts, which may be like cash or things like that, or under a category or an account group. Okay? So like cash and cash equivalent, the category, accounts receivable is a category. Those account group or accounts, have been rolled up into current assets, and those current assets roll up into assets. So we're using that account group hierarchy on a report, where a dimension structure is kind of the same type of thing. You have your different dimensions, but you can group them together. You can record them, which is that checkbox, as a group dimension structure, which allows you to create a hierarchy of those dimensions. These are still the rows, just like your accounts are rows on your financial report. It's a different way of looking at the data. So dimension structures can contain individual dimension groups or other business structures. By nesting dimension structures, you can create a hierarchy of groupings for reporting purposes. The lowest level contains individual dimension groups. This hierarchy of dimension structures determines the headings and also the subtotals in a financial report. Dimension structures can be reused, of course, across multiple financial reports and graphs, just like account groups. You can add dimension structures for any dimension in your company, such as location, department, or customer. Other examples of dimension structures may be like customer by type, and we're actually going to do an example of one like customer by territory, items by product line, or locations by region, different types of grouping that you can create. So in our example here, DesignWorks is the name of our company that we're working with. They want to analyze the revenue generated by each customer by each territory. Okay, so they want a report that's somewhat similar to this one, where we're looking at revenue by territory whenever we're doing that. So to solve this type of problem, we show creating dimension groups and hierarchy. There's a separate report structure list for each dimension you've enabled in your company. So we're looking at customers right here. You'll have a different one for departments or what have you. Dimension structures used on reports can't be deleted. So if you're using a report structure, you cannot delete that one until you have removed all of that dimension structure from all reports, and then you can delete it. The members, which is the column you can see here, the members just shows you a view of the different individual members within a dimension structure. And that's usually just going to be what's called a flat list of individual members. It's going to show kind of those members in there. If you want to see on what reports this dimension structure or dimension group is being used, you can just click on the reports button, and we'll show you the different reports it's going to be used on. So from the financial report writer, you set the report structure, and you define the rows and columns of the report. And you create a dimension-based report. You set the report structure to dimensions on the report information tab. Once you set that, you can't change that report structure after you add your dimensions. So you can't add your dimensions, go back. It's like, oh, they don't want to do more of an account-based structure. You would have to actually start a new report to do that. And then for the rows, you can add one or more dimension structures to the rows of financial report. You can select both types of dimension structures with groups or a hierarchy. By default, the detail level is set to details, but you can change it to summary. We'll take a look at that. Then for our columns, you must specify the account group to use for each column. There are four columns, actually column types that are available on your account, your financial account type of reports that are not available on your dimension-based report, which would be computations on actual, computations on budget, percent on actual, percent on budget. Those are not available. Your dimension-based reports are available in your regular financial type of reports. You can expand columns by time period, account group, or by a dimension like location or something. Or you can use what's called set across columns to select an account group to use for all columns, which is useful if you have like a trend type of report. When creating a dimension-based financial report, you can add dimension attributes to columns. That's what we'll take a look at in our example, which you can display both standard or custom fields. Numerical attributes can be used on that. If you have a custom field that's numeric, they can only be used in calculations if they're used what's called a summary type of column. You're adding columns together. Examples of some of that might be like project analysis, which is a report that would show projects grouped by type. Each project displays the project manager, for example, or the project billing type, standard fields. Or if you're doing a grant type of report, we're using projects. Dimension, the report shows the relevant information about each grant. So you could have your grants listed as your dimension name, which you can see over here is where the dimension name is. You can show the grant agency number, just the start date, the end date, and all custom fields for that grant dimension. So we'll take a look about how you can add those areas. So I'm going to move over to our environment here. The first thing that I'm going to do is go into the reports area. I find that this is usually the easier way to see your dimensions, your dimension structures, your dimension groups. Okay, so of course, here are different dimensions that we're using in this environment. Of course, if we click on our customers, it's going to take us to a customer list. Okay, that showed earlier when you create a filter from our customer list, you can just right here say I want to look at my key customer, which is that filter I set up earlier, and you can use your group on this list in your views here. But from our dimension area, what we're looking at now is a dimension group. So I'm going to go under here and back up to my customers, for my customer groups. Okay, you can see here the ones I'll be pointing out are central customers, east customers, south, and west. Okay, you'll notice that these are marked as dimension structures. They have that checkbox there. So as I mentioned, dimension structure gives you more reporting type of capabilities whenever you're using that. You can also, of course, use it in a hierarchy. Just looking at my central customers here that I created. So this is a group, of course, of information. My central territory customers. So I'm using my group type as all members. And down here, on my customer record, I associated them to territories. So I said with a territory ID equals central. And of course, I'm just pulling back active customers. From that, if I want to see what customers are making up that group, I can go over here, click on members on that row. It will show me my different customers that are members of that group. In order to get the report that we wanted to create a hierarchy of those. So I'm going to go down here where we just were added dimension groups. I'm going to go to dimension structures. Then dimension structures, I'll go back up to customer. Now the ones that I had marked with that checkbox will show up here. On central, east, south, and west, they show up here. In order to group them all together, I wanted to create a hierarchy of customer groups. So when I did that, I just chose that it was a hierarchy of customer structures, and then I just selected from my different dimensional structures that I already created for central, east, south, and west, and I included them here in my report structure. So that kind of showed me all of that information together. To use this on the financial report, after you've done that, I'll go to my financial report. I'll go to all. Go in here to your financial reports area. Of course, you can click on add if you want to add a new one here. I'll kind of start the process, and I'm going to go to one that I already added. So right here is where we decide the report structure. It's going to be dimension or an account based. So in our example, we're going to use a dimension based type of structure. Then once we do that, we would go on to our rows area. So my example that I already have out here, which I'm going to use for the sake of time, I have a territory revenue type of report, as you can see right here. So it's my dimensional base, dimensions what I've selected here. Under my rows, I selected dimension structure. I selected my customer. And underneath that, I can choose from either my hierarchy or from my individual structures, but I chose my all customer territories hierarchy. What that did is it showed those different groups underneath that. So I'm showing details. Of course, details means that I'm going to show each customer and each group for that. I could do it in summary, change it by clicking here to summary, which is just showing a total by my different territories. Then I add my columns. So on my columns here, my first column is dimension name. And my second column is actual data. And for that, under my account group right here, which is required, you can see it's required, I'm pulling back revenue numbers or sales numbers. So I'm using my sales account group. Now, if you do not have, if you're trying to build a dimensional report, but you do not have at least one column that's pulling actual or budget data, you're not going to get any data back. If you just have custom fields in there, it's not going to pull any data back. You have to have at least one column that's pulling financial type of data into that report. So for my other field here, since this is a dimension type of report, I can look at my different dimensions and pull in attributes. So under my customer here, this is where I'm pulling in my custom field. And I'm just choosing, I can choose by all of the fields that are available on my customer record to pull into the report. And so I'm choosing my customer custom field here. I'm using a standard field for customer type ID. As I preview that report, it will show me here by my different territories, east, south, central, and west, and show my customers underneath it with their sales numbers. And then for those customers, it's showing me the custom field and also the customer type for each of those different types of customers. And so that's using a dimensional type of field and dimensional based financial reports. All right, so that's going to bring us to our second set of polling questions right here.
Okay, the poll is open. You should see that on your screen, and we're going to give 2 minutes for these couple questions. Okay, we're just about done here. Hopefully, one of the answers on number 1 helped you out a little bit.
All right, thank you,
All
Sam.
right, Glenn, you can continue. Thanks.
Thanks. All right, so our next topic is using dimension structures in account-based financial reports. So we're talking about filtering columns by dimension structures, and filtering rows by dimension structures as well. When building an account-based financial report, you can filter columns by dimension structures. The example here shows 3 dimension structures. So we have consulting projects, which contains the consulting projects dimension group. Web design projects contains the web design projects dimension group. So think about a group created by project type. Then we have, of course, projects, which is a hierarchical dimension structure that contains the consulting project and the web-based or web design projects in our dimension structure. These dimension structures are used to filter the columns of financial report. As we see here on the top right, column 2 filters by the consulting projects dimension structure group. Column 3 filters by the web design project dimension structure group. And column 4 is kind of a total for those. Filters by the project dimension structure hierarchy. It's a total for all of the projects. You can kind of see that example down here. And actually, when you go to run that report, our consulting projects column, our web design projects, and our total projects. Okay, so kind of a dimension group versus a dimension structure. Remember that you can filter a financial report by a dimension group. A dimension structure gives you additional power and flexibility, so you can filter an individual column by dimension structure. You cannot do it by dimension group, it's by dimension structure. So it's just a matter of checking that box, if it's going to be a dimension structure or not. If it's just a dimension group, you can just see it on your filter tab. It filters the entire report. So the dimension structure can be used in the report. So filtering by dimension structure on rows. When you go to create a financial report, or just choosing your report structure, there's an option, a checkbox down there for filter by dimension structure on rows. Ordinarily, of course, in our example we had previously, actually right here on our columns is where we selected our dimension structure for that. But if you check that box, and you're creating a report to filter by dimension structure on rows, then whenever you're adding your rows, you actually have another column where you can filter by dimension structure here. It gives you kind of another level of looking at information. So you can filter a row by a dimension structure. When the detail level is set to summary or hide accounts, you can expand the row by a dimension structure. I'm sure probably a lot of you all have done that on reports before. The example here shows a profit and loss report that expands the rows by project type. See right here, expanding this travel expenses by project type. So it's showing breaking it down by project type. Another tool that can be used here is creating complex account groups. So this happens sometimes if you are have a financial report that you've started with, but then you need to adjust that financial report. So removing accounts from financial reports, filtering account groups by dimensions, and splitting accounts by dimensions as well. We're going to talk about recreating account groups based on business requirements, filter account groups by dimensions and dimension groups. So our business challenge here for this was our company DesignWorks wants to run a report without the depreciation account. We also want to maintain the original report that includes the depreciation account. But to meet this requirement, we can't make changes to the original account group because that will overwrite the existing reports. Instead, you must duplicate the existing account groups and make changes. Basically, what you do is you create a new version of the affected account groups. Of course, you can save time by doing that by duplicating the existing accounts groups. And to do that, you'll start with the innermost group. So in an example here below, if you can see this, this is our existing account group hierarchy. where we have depreciation and we have amortization. Okay? What you do is that you would create new copies of these or duplicate some of these where you would take out operating expense with no depreciation. That would roll up to earnings before income and taxes with this new group here, and as well as net income. So you're kind of copying from this side up. So you kind of look at it in the hierarchy down here, what you need to remove, and that tells you kind of going up what you need to replace or duplicate to make that change. That allows you to have two different versions of your net income type of report that you can run without depreciation or with depreciation. So filtering account groups by dimensions. So DesignWorks wants a report that subtotals revenue by department groupings. The business challenges cannot be solved by expanding rows by dimensions. The subtotals are controlled by account groups. So to solve this challenge, you'll create account groups filtered by dimensions and dimension groups. You would add the new account groups to a financial report for that. I'm just going to kind of show this example. It's a little bit harder to see than the others, which you've probably dealt with before. So in our example here, I'm going to go back here to my DesignWorks. And I'm going to go to my account groups area. So I may have a financial report that already has my sales account group listed in it. Okay. Now, in this example I'm going to give you right here, we have a financial report. We want to see sales broken out on that financial report. Okay. So in my example here, what I would do is I'll look at this grouping that I have here, showing my different account groups. So I might duplicate this. And we call this, so my sales grouping, it's for my sales department. Okay. So what I would do here is down here are my report filters. I would say I want to specify specific departments. And then right here, I would choose my sales department. So this is just my sales for my sales department. Okay. I'll go ahead and save that. And I could also, once you duplicate that one, either one of them. This would be my sales for my operations department. So I'm using my same account numbers, my same GL account numbers. Down here, I'm going to choose my operations account. So what this is going to pull back for each of these is only going to pull back the financial numbers in this account group that have this department associated to it. It allows you on the same financial report then, if I was to go here to my gross profit, where I have just sales and my cost of sales. I want to break that out. I could say, well, I'm going to show my sales for my sales department and my sales for my operations. And that way, these would be broken out separately on my financial report, using the same GL accounts for both, but I'm pulling it out by my different departments. In your example, you may do the same thing with like your expense categories, and we've done reports for that before, where you may have different expense groupings that would be broken out on the financial report, kind of by showing by different departments as it's going down, even if it's all in the same account groupings. Okay? That's kind of how you do that. You just duplicate the same account group, and you filter it, each one, down there at the bottom by your parameters that you want to use. All right. Our next topic is going to be using reporting accounts. So creating reporting account sets, using reporting account sets with reports. We're going to talk through this. We're not going to do a live example, but we'll talk about how you set it up though. Create a reporting account set, list of reports that support reporting accounts, and run a financial report using a reporting account set. So we'll talk about how you do that. So you can view reports using basically what is an alternate set of accounts, names and numbers. You can map many GL accounts to one reporting account, or excuse me, you can map many GL accounts to one reporting account for that. This allows you to combine several GL accounts into a single reporting account. In our example right here, we can see that benefits health insurance and benefits life insurance are both being grouped under the same financial reporting account called insurance benefits. Or you can do a one-to-one where benefits and payroll taxes is mapped here to this, this payroll taxes account. If something is not mapped but you want it to show up, it shows this little asterisk right here by that. You can see some different examples for this if you have to do statutory type of reporting requirements. So it has a different types of financial report layout or industry regulation or standards, board meeting type of reports, or accountants with multiple clients are different ways that this can be used. The reporting account number doesn't need to adhere to the naming standards of a GL account. So if you're just using 4, 5, or 6 digits for your financial reporting account, you can kind of use pretty much what you want. Contain characters and special characters, letters, of course, as numbers as well. As for using reporting accounts, to use reporting accounts, the enable reporting accounts checkbox must be selected in the general ledger setup. We can see where that's at. Users must have the appropriate general ledger permissions for reporting accounts. When creating a reporting account set, you can specify who the administrator is of that, which determines who owns the account set. This user can access the account set regardless of permissions selected. Of course, the permissions itself, the selection lets you specify who can access this reporting account set. And also you can use it to restrict who can see it. I'm just going to show you where that's at here before I go through some of these others. So in our area here, we go into General Ledger, under Setup, Configuration. If we scroll down here, there's an option right here under Reports and Budgets. It says Enable Reporting Account Labels. Okay. Whenever you select this, as it says, you may not see it automatically. You would need to go under your company and your permissions or roles under General Ledger and give yourself access to reporting accounts. Once you do that, in the system, you go back up here to your all, you'll see under General Ledger accounts, you'll have reporting accounts. When you set those up, I'll start an example right here for statutory reporting. Give it an administrator for that. You can also decide, as it said, permissions of who can see this. Then you can import in your reporting accounts, which is probably what most people would do. If you have a set of reporting accounts, you can import those in. Those would show up here. And then it's going to show your GL accounts that you're currently using. And this is where you would map it. You would select a reporting account from that list up there, and you would map those things to these reporting accounts. And on your financial report, you're doing a financial report. Select a statement here as an example. On our financial report, under formats, right here, and this page set up in columns. I'm sorry. Looking over it here. The checkbox to user reporting accounts. Oh yeah, reporting accounts. And you would select from your reporting accounts. Okay, that you want to use. Then we would use these in place of your GL accounts that you have on that report. That way you don't have to have different types of reports. You can use the same report you may have been using, but you can just select to run it either using your reporting accounts, or you can take that out, or you can have it prompt you if you want it to run by your reporting accounts or not. That's using reporting accounts. Don't have a whole lot of people using those yet. Now that our next topic, we'll be talking about using books within the system. We're talking about our main reporting books, GAAP and tax books, user-defined books, creating and using user-defined books, and using books in reports. So kind of our objectives here are to go over each of these and actually show these and how you use these in reports as well. So Intacct can be configured to use one of these accounting methods, by default, cash only, accrual only, or both accrual and cash. If the accounting method is set to both, the default reporting book, either cash or accrual, must be specified in the general ledger setup. And you can override the default reporting book on the filters tab with a financial report. So your main reporting books are always going to be your cash and accrual books. Other than that, we don't have too many people that use GAAP and tax reporting books, but at the end of the fiscal year, companies reconcile their accounting or their generally accepted accounting principles and their tax rules. As a result, these reconciliations, adjustments are often made for the GAAP and tax compliance. It's usually desirable to post these adjustments without changing historical monthly amounts to maintain the integrity of the operational reporting. Examples of these adjustments are depreciation, amortization, and tax liability. To use the GAAP book, the Enable GAAP Adjustments Journal checkbox must be selected in General Ledger Setup. Most of you all have seen that. There's also the checkbox there for the tax book as well. Once you select those, the user then has to have appropriate General Ledger permissions for making GAAP or tax adjusting entries. That's usually a thing people forget to do that. Then the other type of book is what's called the user-defined book. If you have different reporting standards that you need to manage beyond GAAP and tax, you can create user-defined books. User-defined books let you track and report on specialized accounting entries, such as industry-specific accounting differences that may be reflected in certain reports, or tax code differences for geographical areas that you do business in, benchmarking standards that you want to compare yourself against, or other types of entries that are outside of your normal operational books. To use user-defined books, in your General Ledger Setup section, there is a checkbox for user-defined books. Then you also, of course, have to have the appropriate permissions under General Ledger to use user-defined journal entries, books, and journals. For each user-defined book, you must create one or more user-defined journals. In creating a user-defined journal, you must select a user-defined book for the journal. Each user-defined journal is tied to one and only one user-defined book. So it's a one-to-one. When adding a journal entry for user-defined book, you specify the journal, which determines which of the books to use for that. Using those in financial reports then, each column in a financial report can include any combination of other books. You click Edit Books to select the ones you want to include. This lets you compare reporting methods in a single financial report. If the accounting method is set to both cash and accrual, you can only display one main reporting book, either cash or accrual, in a financial report. You select the main reporting book on the Filters tab, and the main reporting book applies to the entire report. You can also use books in standard GL types of reports as well. You can view books with the standard GL reports listed here. If you're looking at General Ledger, trial books, and these that you have listed here. In the filter section, you select the other books to display in the report. You can select the combined reporting book with other books checkbox to combine the main reporting book with the selected other books. If you take a look at this in our system here, go back one page here. So the way that we would set this up, of course, under a General Ledger area, we go under Setup, under Configuration. And if we scroll down here, we would select Enable User-Defined Books. You can see right here. So once we do that, then of course we would have to give ourselves permissions under our company area, give ourselves permissions to user-defined books, journals, and entries. Then under our setup, over here on the lower side, this is where you have your user-defined books. I have a book I have created here, just called Restatement. Okay. If I click on Edit here, I'll just put in my book ID and of course a description for that. You can use what's called management reporting books. Okay. If you have it selected for management reporting, you can see right here, management reporting books bypass closed periods but don't impact your actual books. So you can post to them at any time without affecting your actuals, making these books especially useful for management planning or financial analysis. You can include this book in addition to your actual books. When you run reports, you can only configure user-defined journals in the software digital board book to post to a management reporting book. Subledgers such as accounts payable can't be configured to post to management reporting books to protect the integrity of your financial data. But using management reporting books, if your situation allows for that, is a good thing to do. So once you have your book created, I have my book, user-defined book called Restatement, and I'll create a journal, so my user-defined journal. Now, try to be kind of specific on my user-defined journal to say this is my Restatement user-defined journal for that. And it's, of course, you're just giving it, just like your other journals, a symbol and a title for that. And you're putting what user-defined book it is associated to. Remember, it's a one-to-one between your journal and your book. Now, as you're using this information in your reports, then you would enter a journal entry over here, just like you normally do, except you have journal entries, adjusting, recurring. The one here is user-defined journal entries. They function the same way. You can look here and view your transactions. If you're doing that, I wanted to add a new journal entry. I would select my plus sign as I normally do. I would select from my user-defined journals. And of course, putting my information in there for that. And then, of course, doing my journal entry for that. So I'm making this entry just to my user-defined journals. This is not going to affect my regular accrual books in this area because this is a accrual-based company. So I'm not going to affect those books. These are just going to my user-defined journals, those entries. People use these for a lot of different areas. Sometimes if you're using other features like maybe prepaid expense or using dynamic allocations, they may set up user-defined journals to allow for those types of entries as well. Some people, if they are going through an acquisition, you may set up a user-defined journal to either back out the first part of the year or for that part of the year going forward, so that you can kind of show what is our activity up to this point or from this point going forward. So that they can be used in those regards as well. So user-defined books has a lot of capabilities within the system. In my example that I have here for my entry, which I will show, for my journals, I'm going to view my transaction. In my transaction here, when I created my original entry, here, I'm not making any changes. In my situation, we closed our month out for this at the end of October, and I put mine back where I had data in this. But there was some more activity that kind of happened, but that was actually associated to October, even though it happened in November. So for my restatement books, I wanted to record some additional sales and some additional costs and office expense that happened, right after the close of the year, actually the close of the month. But even though there should have been there, just kind of say, okay, if we would have had all of our information in at the end of the month, this is kind of what actually this month did. Is what I'm doing here. So in this one, I'm actually reversing it out right at the beginning of the next month. Those would actually, those charges would hit. So that's kind of what I'm doing in this entry. In our financial report, I've created just a financial report here, kind of an income statement, a restatement. So my financial report is set up very much similar the same way. I have my accounts area right here. This is a regular income statement type of report. For my rows, of course, I'm using my regular net income loss for this type of financial report. Then for my columns is where this kind of comes into play, is on my columns area. So as we can see right here, I have my first account name. Okay. Then I have my actual data, my actual column right here. You can see in this actual column, if I go down here, since I'm using multiple books, I have my reporting book. It's set to accrual, and I'm not using any other books. For my restatement, and the way I'm doing this one, I'm actually showing my actual, and I'm showing a column for my restatement entries. So my restatement here, I would click on Edit Books. You can see right here I have restatement. Now you can select if you want to include the main reporting book accrual with your selected books. So in other words, you're kind of layering them on top of each other. Okay, that's the option you have there. I'm not doing that in this column. I'm just showing my restatement. But in my adjusted column right here, I am showing my accrual books. I do have this checked with my restatement books. Okay, just so we can kind of see what this looks like. If I preview this, then for this, my month ending, I have my actual, and I have my restatement entries to my restatement book, my user defined book, and then I have those combined together in my adjusted to see if, if these things did happen. This is kind of my adjusted books. So my accrual books are staying the same. I've not messed with my accrual books. I have my restatement in there. It's kind of a separate books that can be viewed with my financial information. Okay. Now at this point, we have one more polling question. Our last one.
Yes, you should see that poll on your screen right now. We'll have about 2 minutes for this one.
Okay. All right, that brings us to a conclusion of our hot topics training for today. As Sarah mentioned, this slide deck that we're using, this information will be able to be emailed to you. In that there are some additional information in there as you go through some of the different exercises or areas that we went through today to hopefully to help you kind of use those tools within your financial reporting that you're currently doing within the system. If you do need some additional help reporting, which you need to reach out to us on, I would encourage you to contact Deanna Brooks. This is her email address right here. Maybe you've probably spoken to her in the past, or you can reach out actually to any of us. We'll be glad to help in any way that we can with your financial reporting needs. At this time, I'll transition over to our new features training to show what came out in the latest release of Sage Intacct. I'll stop sharing for just a moment while I make that transition.
Glenn, we did have a question. I don't know if you want to address that first before we move on. The question is how best to print on a report that's using all the criteria used to generate the report, either input in the footer section or another method.
So if you want to add, I guess, maybe additional text to that report that you're doing, I would say that you have kind of a couple options for that. One of those would be, and let me actually display this again. On your financial reports, you can put things in the footer section. They actually, a couple of releases ago, increased the size of the footer so that you could put kind of audited statement information in the footer. So they did increase the size of it quite a bit to allow to have some additional information in there. Another option that you might have as well is if you ever use any of the scheduled reports, within the system, you can create, and if you go here to your financial reports area or go up here and do your report center, sometimes a little bit easier to do that. Up here under the new report, you can select, I want to create a new report group. Now in that new report group, you can select to include basically what is a Word template. So you think of a cover page type of information. So you can include that if you're creating a group, a report group. And of course, that report group doesn't have to be emailed out. It can just be printed out. But if you create a new report group, you can include like a template type of information as well. Now you set up those templates here under your company area. And speak under your company area. You can set up those are your email templates here, but there is a section here, looks like they might have possibly not have moved it, where you can set up kind of a template that you can use in your, oh, here it is, cover letters. Just move up here to reports area. So you can use a cover letter and then include that cover letter with your report group. So that also kind of helps if you need some additional place to put, kind of text or information that you want to include as well. Is there any other questions?
Great, thanks for going over that. And I don't see any other questions right now.
Okay.
Yep, thanks, Glenn.
So I'm just going to switch PowerPoints here. All right. Okay, so release 3 is what we're going over the information for today. So according to our release calendar, release 3 came out at the end of August. For that, our next release is coming out in November 13th. They plan to do that next release. There are some things that I think still show in release 3 that they've actually have pushed out to release 4. One of those is going to be the 1099 type of information, the 1099C information. They were going to make that change in release 3. And then from hearing from a lot of the partners, they decided not to do that so quickly because there's some processes that we think need to be worked out as far as the 1099 C forms. And we'll be sending that out as we're working with Intacct on what that process is going to be to change over to create 1099s NEC here for 2020 and how that process is going to flow. So we'll be providing that information out to all of our customers as soon as we kind of get some final information there. Now, this just kind of shows an overview of the different areas where changes were made here for release 3 today. So some of these will be going through as we're talking about them, kind of showing you the system. Some of them will just be more discussion as we kind of go through the new features. So amount to pay fields. This is what you see on your pay bills area. So when you enter a credit for a payment, the amount to pay automatically updates when we need to calculate this value manually. And also, they've also added a way to easily view and pay partially paid bills. You no longer have to wait to complete the payment flow. Partial payment in order to pay off the balance of the partially paid bill. You can actually pay the partial payment as you're entering that or entering those 2 payments for that. So the amounts to pay field automatically populates in 2 areas. On the pay bills page, when you select a payment and click apply credits. And on the bills page, the bills detail page, when you manually apply credits. So kind of where that's at. If we are going under our area here, I'm going to go under accounts payable and go to my pay bills area. If I'm looking at my payments here. Now before, whenever you selected, where you had a credit available here and you selected to apply credits, you kind of had to put in what your amount to pay, your difference over here. So all they've done is whenever you click on apply credits is that it updates your amount to pay over here. They've also added these buttons here, your payment amount or your credits, from that, they've added that as well. Okay. If it's not, you're not looking at it here, you want to kind of break that down. So I'm going to clear credits now for a second. You can still click on line details. And then here, if you're entering a certain amount and you want to kind of plot it out by line for that, then you can put in your credit to apply here, and it's going to update your amount to pay over here. So you no longer have to calculate those. So you can put in the credits as you wish to, and it will show kind of your amount to pay over here. It will be adjusted. So those kind of where they've updated those fields, so you just didn't have to calculate that manually. Our next is accounts receivable. To prevent editing on posted transactions after print, so 2 checkboxes on the configure AR page gives you better control over printed email transactions. And custom reports on AR payment. A lot of these others right here, if you ever try to create some custom field or smart events, it was kind of confusing of which field to use. There was one called AR payment, or it was spelled out, and there was one that was kind of abbreviated. They kind of combined that. There's just one now for that. And then in this release, they also rolled out the waterfall logic of AR application to all remaining companies. This actually came out, I think, in release 1 for kind of waterfall logic whenever you're applying payments. It did not work if you had a multi-entity environment with multi-currency. And so now they've kind of rolled that out to basically all customers now have that capability. It was kind of limited before. So on the AR payments area, will prevent the editing on posted transactions after print. Under our accounts receivable configuration, there's 2 additional options here. Disable editing after posted transactions are printed or emailed. Okay. And also flag is printed when any print or email option is selected. Those are 2 options that you can turn on within the system. Our next is admin and company. The default country for addresses now in your company OXD has ISO country codes enabled. The country field auto-populates with the default country when you enter an address. This helps with kind of entering data. And also configure a time offset for scheduled jobs. So most of the time scheduled jobs run right after midnight. It's usually kind of when they ran. But now you can kind of schedule them to avoid conflicts with other scheduled processes if you're in a different time zone or something, of how those are going to run. Because usually it was based off of what ran about midnight in the time zone that your company is set up in. Sometimes that conflicts with other jobs you have running. For budgeting and planning, some new features increase visibility to your GL accounts, improve budget line allocations awareness across the budget and planning application. Get started working with models more quickly by using or by importing model lines from Excel. Fixed assumptions now appear on the report, and budget and planning now supports all reporting books in addition to cash accrual and global consolidation books. Under regular balance sheets, balance sheet budgets are now stored for the period. You set up your GL through the UI or with a CSV file. The value for budget balance sheets accounts is now for the period, and the period is no longer used. And that kind of messed up whenever that was being used on budgets and other things within the system. So if you look now under your general ledger setup, configuration, and underneath here, budget balances sheet accounts by. This also always used to be end of period. Now it's for the period, which kind of is going to provide or remove some errors that were happening within using that budgeting and reporting type of capability. The biggest change for this thing that comes in our cash management area. The added credit card reconciliation process. This very much mimics the bank cloud functionality for reconciling bank accounts. So credit card reconciliation with bank feeds is there. If you have any activity in South Africa, that also supports bank file payments between companies located in South Africa. The credit card and charge payoffs workflow. A few enhancements there. You can now, for the first time ever, delete a credit card transaction, which is a great thing that a lot of people have always asked for. You can view credit card transactions by the state that they're in. There's a new look for charge payoffs, filter and sort for credit card transactions, and charge payoffs save button, renamed to post for clarity. And of course, easier reconciliations. Select all transactions with one click on the find match page. Description field on the reconciled bank account page is resized for readability. Transaction list load more quickly. They have a limited number of transactions. Filter and sort like transaction lists by page by account type, and then secondary reconciliation changes or just changes to the buttons and the links that they're using there. The other credit card process is now gone. It has been retired out of the system. We'll take a look at that. If we go under our cash management area, that on our credit card, whenever you have your credit card set up, you will go out there and just like you did on the bank cloud, there'll be a banking cloud as well for your credit card that you will connect to your credit card company that you would connect to there in order to make that connection. Yeah. Then whenever you go to do your reconciliation, just like you did for your bank, you go to credit card reconciliation. For that, you'll choose, of course, your account you're going to reconcile into your information, statement ending balance and all. And you'll click on continue for that. On my environment here, I don't expect very many things to match up because I'm just using data from a generic type of bank. But of course, it shows your Intacct transactions as you usually would here. You can choose your match for that, or you can look at your bank transactions here and see your charges. One thing that you will now have, if you need to add a line here that you have over here in your actions, you can choose to do a credit card transaction, create a journal entry, or just choose to ignore it within the system as you're doing that. Okay. As you could do before, you can of course sort by your column headings. You can search for things within that as well. Whenever you're trying to find your matches. And so you can bring in your credit card transactions now for your credit card reconciliation. There's a pretty good video that was done on this that is of course available in your new features area that you can watch on that. Contracts, more flexibility when creating MEA allocations. You can basically clear individual MEA allocations one at a time. Quickly view a contract's detail, go down from the contract line grid. Support for automatic application for inline credits to invoices. And more secure contract editing. Contract schedules now requires edit permissions once you do that. Then for general ledger, define dynamic allocations across entities. So you can now do that, especially If your company is subscribed to dynamic allocations, you can now allocate costs across several different entities and each entity's own base currency. The dynamic allocations was restricted just to US-based currency up until this point. We quickly generate a new recurring entry from an existing journal entry. That's something that hasn't been available in the past. And we'll kind of take a look at that. And of course, a cleaner look for recurring journal entries as well. The recurring journal entry page now separates the entry details from the recurring schedule on entry and schedule tabs. We talked about that balance sheet changes that's been done on the setup. So to look at these, the main one here is if we go under our general ledger, we go under our journals. If we're looking at our transactions under our general ledger journal, and if we have, I'll just click on one of these right here. Before, you could not just take this entry and turn it into a recurring, but now you can up here on the right-hand side under More Actions. You have the option to select a recur. That will bring you over here to your recurring. Now, they kept, as I mentioned, cleaned it up a little bit. They put the schedule on a separate tab, which is a little bit cleaner than having it all kind of top and bottom on one tab with that information. But you can create that recurring journal entry directly from a regular journal entry now. Okay, inventory control, improved bin tracking to increase the efficiency of item management in your warehouses. The bin's unique across all warehouses and added new bin attributes. So we kind of overhauled the warehouse information and bin information pages. We'll take a look at that. Also, warehouse transfer enhancements now that bins are unique. Plus warehouses, they've changed warehouse transfer, so you specify the from and to bin in the transfer as well. If you have inventory set up within your system, you go under inventory control now. If you're looking at, we'll look at warehouses first. If you have warehouses set up, under each warehouse, you now have this section down here for bin tracking. You can give it a bin ID and put a description, the zone, the aisle, the row, the face. You put all this information in. It could be unique to your warehouse of where that information is at. So this tracking information wasn't here before, but this would also help the pick list to tell someone exactly where it's at. You'll also see that if you go under your bins area, you're adding a new bin. Click on that. And under your bin, you can select your zone, your face, your bin description, your aisle, your warehouse. You can be very specific about your bin information. Order entry, you can now track in the audit who turned recurring transactions off. It shows you that now. Import custom fields for recurring transaction templates. So there's a new CSV import file for that. Prevent draft transactions from being flagged as printed. That was that setting that we saw earlier. It's available. Previously printed or email draft transactions were already flagged as printed, which could make editing the transaction difficult. Remove that. The drop ship and buy to order transactions, you can have show in the vendor currency now. If you use multiple currencies in those transactions. And those are, of course, done the purchasing transaction. Multi-currency and multi-entity. For multi-currency, just cleaner data, multi-currency transactions using the Intacct daily rate. With a date prior to accidentally or blocked due to exchange rates before accidentally being unavailable. And then automatically generate draft journal entries for your reevaluation report. So basically the system can now auto-create draft journal entries, or if you have to run those reevaluation reports in your purchasing or order entries areas, it can automatically create those for you. For multi-entity, easier access to your top level. So this is something that probably all of us have done within the system. If you are under an entity, and then you go to another entity, and while you're in there, and that other entity, for some reason, you click up here and you take away your top entity. Usually you had to kind of log out and log back in to get back into that entity. Well, now you can just From here, you can click on top level now, which will open up a tab back to the top level that you don't have to get out and get back in. Salesforce, they're kind of having a adopter program going on right now. If you're not for profit and you're using Salesforce for just the integration between a CRM integration for nonprofit, it's kind of going on right now. If it's something that you're interested in for that, if you're using Salesforce to manage some of your nonprofit information. They've also added some streamlined workflow processes for updating opportunity product records in Salesforce. Reporting and insights, they've added to the custom report writer, which is our last hot topics training. For that, we've added some support for some account groups in there now that you can have access to. So if you're using those, you'll have a little bit more capability. Report across workflows and business processes. You can combine reporting areas to provide maximum insights without having to do outside spreadsheets for that. And then lastly, of course, there has been some platform and web services changes. Create document templates on the fly using XML document template. Onload scripts and content security policies. Trigger enhancements. So most of these have to do for more developer type of activities that you can now have more trigger enhancements or new objects and APIs for the construction module. Some of those things are out there at this time for that. All this information, of course, that we're looking at here, all of this is available within your environment. As always, under your home page, you can check out the release, read the release notes, which is everything we went over today. Information, you can see highlighted videos. For example, if you wanted to see the new credit card reconciliation, you can go to that area and you can watch a video that kind of walks you through that in a little bit more detail of that information. So everything we know today is available out here in your Intacct environment. Okay. So that wraps up our new features training that we've had to kind of go over this last release 3 changes to the Intacct environment. And that's all I have for today, Sarah.
Okay. We actually have a question on cost for the budget module and the interactive report writer module.
Okay. If you can get that person's name, we'll put them in touch with someone to provide that information to them.
Okay.
I don't have it off the top of my head. Is there any other questions?
If anybody has any other questions right now, feel free to submit. But I don't see any other questions right now.
Wait for just a minute or two, see if any more comes in.
Nope, I'm not seeing any other questions, but well, thank you, Glenn. I know we've covered a lot of content today, so if you have any questions that do come up, please feel free to contact Deanna Brooks, and that her contact information will be in the slides that we'll send out. And we'll also be sending out a survey. We'd love to get your feedback on this presentation. And thanks so much for attending today's presentation, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks again, Glenn.